Whenever we talk about the death of Sirius Black, we usually talk about it as an immense tragedy in the storyline. It's the moment that seemingly Harry loses the one chance he really had at having a home somewhere. But let's look a little bit closer at the logistics of Sirius dying. It wasn't maybe just a sad accident, maybe it was a structural necessity for everything else to come. If we think about it, if Sirius had lived, the entire Dumbledore plan seems to start falling apart. Now, I know that bringing up Dumbledore is quite divisive. Some fans see him as the ultimate grandfather figure and a man carrying a burden that no one else could, and others see him as a cold, Machiavellian, yes, I listen to Taylor Swift, chess player who raises Harry like a pig for slaughter.
Raising him like a pig for slaughter.
Don't tell me now that you've grown to care for the boy.
Regardless of where you stand on Dumbledore's morality, we have to be able to agree on one thing. His plan for the wall requires Harry to be isolated. It requires Harry to be manageable and malleable. And Sirius Black potentially would have been the only person with the guts to look at Dumbledore and say, he's a person, not a weapon. Today we're going to look at the Sirius paradox. We're going to look at why his survival would have potentially saved Harry's soul, but doomed the wall. What if Sirius had survived? To understand why Sirius was such a threat to the status quo, we have to look at the management of Harry throughout the movies and the books. Up until the Ministry, Harry is surrounded by adults who love him, but they do all love him through a very specific lens. Let's take a look at Hagrid. He's the heart. He's the first one to show Harry the wizarding world, but Hagrid is a Dumbledore man through and through. If Dumbledore says a secret is a secret, Hagrid will accidentally on purpose keep it. He isn't necessarily a peer to Harry, he's a loyalist to the headmaster. Then of course we can't talk about love for Harry without talking about Molly Weasley. She seemingly is the mother that Harry never really had, but in the Order of the Phoenix we see a conflict start to arise between her and Sirius. Molly very much, I think, wants to protect Harry's innocence. She wants to feed him, keep him safe, and keep the wall out of sight, out of mind. To her, Harry is more of a child that needs to be shielded, which in his early years is exactly what he needed, but I think as the movies go on, he starts to also need something a little bit different, but she's refusing to give that to him. And then of course we also have to talk about Remus Lupin, who might be the most complex of all. Remus is Harry's link to the past, but he's also a man defined by a deep internalized shame. He spends, I think, most of the series trying not to make waves too much. And alongside that, he follows the Order's rules to a T. And then of course there's Dumbledore. Dumbledore loves Harry like a great grand design. He's always looking at the greater good. And so we're left with Sirius, seemingly the only adult in the room who doesn't answer to Dumbledore's grand design. He's the only one who really argues at the kitchen table in Grimmauld Place that Harry should be briefed on Voldemort's movements.
Something he didn't have last time.
You might as well induct him into the Order straight away.
Good, I want to join. If Voldemort's raising an army, then I want to fight.
He doesn't seemingly feel the need to protect Harry's innocence anymore. He wants to protect Harry's agency. However, I do also think that he very much sees James in Harry, and I think feels a lot of shame towards James and Lily, and so it causes this conflict as well.
Nice one, James!
So to understand why Sirius was a disruptor and would have continued to be so, we have to talk about what it actually means to be a marauder. In the movies, the marauders are very much treated as basically a friend group, and we don't hear much more about them. But in the books, being a marauder was a radical act. They were four of the most brilliant students that Hogwarts had seen in generations. They mastered animagus transformations while they were still teenagers just to support a friend. They mapped every inch of the school, and they were the masters of subverting authority. And so Sirius isn't just a grandfather figure, he was a rebel by trade. He spent his entire youth rejecting his own family's dark arts legacy, and then he spent most of his adult life rejecting the Ministry's incompetence. So when you put a marauder in a house with Harry, you're not just giving him a guardian. If anything, you might be giving him a mentor and defiance, which Harry really doesn't need more of. Let's also not forget that Sirius was a guy who spent 12 years in Azkaban.
I did my waiting! 12 years of it! In Azkaban!
A prison meant to strip your soul away from you, but he came out of that with his spirit quite intact. Not perfect, but he was still pretty good. He might have been the only person who could have taught Harry how to stand up to Dumbledore without flinching. And this starts to lead us towards the part of the puzzle where we see Dumbledore feeding Harry these crumbs in the Half-Blood Prince. Dumbledore's teaching style in the movie and the book is incredibly controlled. He gives Harry these tiny fragments of Voldemort's history, just enough to have him thinking. He shows him the Gaunt family to explain the lineage. He shows him at the orphanage to explain his trauma. And he shows him Slughorn's memory to explain the ambition that Voldemort has. However, Dumbledore keeps the Horcrux reveal until the very last second, seemingly having known about it for quite some time. He keeps the truth about the Prophet and the self-sacrifice hidden in the shadows of his own mind. So now let's imagine if Sirius had been alive in Book 6. Every time Harry comes back from a lesson with Dumbledore, he's going to talk to Sirius about it. And Sirius realistically isn't going to tell him to be patient. Sirius knows Dumbledore's secrets at this point probably better than anyone else. He was there during the First War. He knows how Dumbledore tends to operate. So if Sirius is there, the need-to-know system has a potential of starting to completely break down. I think Sirius would have pushed Harry to try and get more of the full picture. I think he would have encouraged Harry to keep looking at Malfoy and Snape, but that wouldn't necessarily be for the best. I mean, let's talk about it. I think Sirius does have a tendency to create situations that maybe aren't great for teenagers to find themselves in. While staying on the trail more would have potentially helped them figure out parts of what's going on earlier, I think they already were aware, especially of how combined Malfoy's story and Voldemort's story were becoming. I think if anything, if they'd pushed that more and more and more, there would have been a higher chance that Harry would have gotten into trouble very early on. All that being said though, having Sirius could mean that for the first time, Harry would have a war council of sorts of his own that maybe didn't include the headmaster. So we've talked a little bit generally, but now let's look at what I think the actual dominoes in the war would have been had Sirius survived. First, we have to talk about the locket. Sirius knows every inch of 12 Grimmauld Place. While Dumbledore is showing Harry memories of Voldemort's childhood, Sirius most likely would realize that the heavy locket no one could open from their spring cleaning in Order of the Phoenix was a Horcrux. Hence, they would have had the potential to destroy the Horcrux an entire year earlier by the end of Book 6. Then we have to talk a little about the Kreacher and Regulus revelation as well. Sirius, I think, is one of the only people who would have been able to get the truth out of Kreacher without his resistance. And so the story of Regulus Black would come out in summer of 1996, giving Harry and Dumbledore a massive head start on Voldemort's secret. Then I think we also would have had a potential for a bit of like a war at two fronts situation. Instead of Harry being what some might describe as a passive student, Sirius, I think, would try and turn him into a proactive hunter. So while Dumbledore is off searching for the ring or the cup, Sirius would be using his old marauder connections and Black family resources to track down the other soul pieces, potentially with Harry. I really think they would have become a very dynamic duo. But then I think we'd also have the opportunity for more conflict had Sirius been there, especially between Snape, Dumbledore, and him. I don't think Sirius would have ever let Snape kill Dumbledore in the tower. He would have potentially intervened here if he was aware of what was going on through Harry's initial stalking of Malfoy and everything that's kind of going on at the same time. So if Sirius is there, we either have the potential that Snape's cover gets blown way earlier, there's another opportunity where Sirius could have potentially died, or he would have potentially sabotaged the plan by saving Dumbledore from Snape, which obviously would have huge repercussions for the rest of the storyline. I also think that if Sirius had been alive, we would have seen a bit more of a resistance of more people coming together. I think with Sirius alive and cleared of the charges after the Ministry battle, he would become a bit more of a public figure of sorts and could rally the old families and the remnants of the original order much more effectively than a teenager like Harry could. So I think we'd see a build-up of the resistance a lot more, which would have been really, really interesting. And so we have to think about how would this have affected the entire war in general. With all honesty, I think they still would have won the war, but I think it would have played out very differently. There would have been a real return of the marauder spirit, and Voldemort wouldn't have been defeated by ancient magic. He would have been outmaneuvered by the very people he thought he had wiped out decades ago. But then, of course, we have to look at the very dark domino that's in effect here as well. If Sirius lives, Harry has somewhat of a home, a happy life. And if Harry is happy, he might not be very willing to sacrifice himself.
When all this is over, we'll be a proper family. We'll see.
Harry has sacrificed continuously throughout the movies and the books, and while I think there's a chance he still would have, I think it would have been a lot more difficult for him if he had had to leave Sirius behind. Harry obviously has a very close relationship with his friends, but he at the same time has been isolated as well over the last few movies, and I think had Sirius been there, not only would he have had him constantly there, but I think Sirius would have helped him nourish his friendships more throughout the last few books as well. So he has a lot more to lose if he is to sacrifice himself. In the cold logic of war, Dumbledore needs Harry to be a man of sorrows, realistically. He needed him to be someone who at this point has maybe lost so much that walking into death didn't feel like losing, but if anything felt like joining the people he'd loved and lost. And we see that happening in the forest as well before he goes to Voldemort. We see Harry going towards Voldemort with almost an acceptance and hope that he will be reunited with his parents and Sirius, Lupin, etc. when the moment eventually comes. But Sirius would have potentially been Harry's happy ending. He would have been a light at the end of the tunnel. If you give Harry that anchor, it might have been very difficult for him to let go. In a way, you could argue Sirius had to die so that Harry could become the person who didn't care about living anymore. Sirius was a disruptor, and he would have fought incredibly hard for Harry's right to be a person, not just a prophecy, but I think in doing so, he might have made Harry a little bit too human to fulfill the mission. So if we look at it like that, maybe the real tragedy isn't that Sirius dies, but that in Dumbledore's world, there simply isn't space for both a savior and a son. And so we've come to the end of our what if. What if Sirius had survived? What do you think would have happened if Sirius had survived? How do you think everything would play out? Do you think the good guys would still win, or do you think it would even change that outcome as well? Would you have preferred a happy ending with Sirius, even if it probably would have meant a harder war? Or do you think everything the way it happens is exactly as it should? Either way, let me know in the comments below. If you also have any other ideas, any other what ifs that you want to see, let me know. This one's a bit of a bigger one because we're talking about the death of a character. Usually I like to focus on small things that would have changed. What if a certain door hadn't opened? What if a certain item was left behind? So if there's anything you want to see, let me know, or subscribe and join my community and let me know in the community tab as well. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for spending the time. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, evening, morning, weekend, whatever it may be, and I'll see you in the next universe.